Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be doing some more deep lore speculation. In particular, today I want to talk to you guys about the bloodstones. I do fully believe that over the coming patches, maybe not too soon, but at some point in Season 2 or Season 3, the bloodstones are going to become a lot more important in the story, and we're going to start having to focus on them. So you can consider this video to keep you caught up and thinking about what their significance is. As I reveal more information to you, I will weave it into some greater theories of mine about where I believe the story is going. And not just this idea of the Pale Tree and the 6 orbs, but a lot of other parts of the plot too, like Canach joining the Shining Blade, and this locket that will reveal the true heir to the human throne. I believe it is all connected, and hopefully I'll explain it elaborately. I'll open up the video with a really cool image someone posted about on Reddit and really got me thinking about this topic in particular. An inscription that seems to glow on one of the bloodstones back in Guild Wars Prophecies, the very first installment of the Guild Wars franchise that came out back in 2005. You'll see in this cutscene it glows with a very familiar looking inscription. Now, it's not exactly like what we saw in that Eternal Alchemy cutscene, but it is very similar, right? We have a big circle in the middle and 6 other circles coming off in other directions. Is this significant somehow? And I would actually argue, yes, it is. I will also just note at the argument some people will make saying, wow, this was back in 2005. Of course it wasn't intentional. There were no Elder Dragons back in the story. I think that's true, but I also think it could be an invalid argument and not something worth bringing to the table. Obviously, the devs did have no idea about the Elder Dragons back then, but that doesn't mean that now they went back to their old lore, they had a serious sit down, a look at their universe, and tried to create a story that was cohesive and brought everything together. Does it matter if they didn't know originally? I would argue, no, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that now they may be attributing meaning to these things. I do think that this is a lot more than a coincidence. This is probably intentional, and especially considering these patches have been pushing us deeper into the Maguma jungle. This image you can see from Guild Wars 1, where is this set? The Maguma jungle. Maybe it's not a coincidence that we're seeing all this stuff that looks very similar to something on the Bloodstone, a lot of story to do with magic, and we just so happen to be geographically moving closer to one of the most important plot locations of the first game. So what the hell am I talking about? I want to bring everyone onto the same page here. What exactly are the Bloodstones? Well, to explain this, I'll give you a bit of a timeline as we know it about the history of Tyria, according to Guild Wars 2. So the story right now, obviously, is we've got Mordremoth, an Elder Dragon. The earliest point in the story, I would say, was somewhere around, 10 to 20,000 years ago, and the Elder Dragons were asleep. They were inactive, they were sleeping, right? As they sleep, we have seen this multiple times throughout the series, the Elder Dragons seep magic into the world, okay? As they sleep, they seem to lose magic from themselves. The Asura realized this and built a giant hub of Asura gates around what they believed to just be a pocket of energy, but turned out to be Primordius seeping magic into the earth. The human gods, though they probably knew of the Elder Dragons when they arrived on Tyria, they built their main city, Ara, over a sleeping Elder Dragons just because it was a magically infused area. We have specific dialogue from Ara Explorable that states that the gods did build it here because of the magic, not that they necessarily knew it was coming from Zhaitan. So we know that the Elder Dragons like to consume magic, and we know that while they're asleep, they are losing it and is seeping back into the world. We also know that races seem to be taking advantage of that magic as it seeps into this world. This means around 10,000 years ago, when they were asleep back then, as people found this magic, it was unfettered magic. It was free magic, nothing was containing it, and it was used by the inhabitants of the world at great power. And from this were born 5 particularly powerful, intelligent races: the Seers, the Gw2, the Mursaat, the Forgotten, and the Dwarves. Eventually, the Elder Dragons, who had constantly been losing magic, grew hungry, and they woke up. And their mission back then when they woke up was presumably just as it is now, to find and consume as much magic as they can. This would mean, if it had to, corrupting or destroying anything in their paths. If there was an intelligent race stood before him that had consumed a lot of magic, well, then he was going to kill that thing so that they could get their magic back. The Elder Dragons woke up and brought destruction to Tyria. So these 5 powerful races put their heads together and decided, right, how are we going to face a threat? Much like we're supposed to be doing in Guild Wars 2 with the Sylvari, the Char, the Norn, and so forth. Well, one of the plans they came up with was devised by the Seers. The Seers knew that the Elder Dragons was consuming magic, and so what they did was they created a giant magical seal in which they asked the 5 races to place their magic in, right? And by filling this magical seal with as much magic as possible, they were going to close it off, and the Elder Dragons could eat anything they wanted on Tyria, but they could never get this magic that had been stored away in the Bloodstone. And even if these races couldn't defeat the Elder Dragons, this measure of last resort would ensure there was still magic in some form on Tyria, and perhaps prevent, maybe in their eyes, the destruction of the entire planet. This plan actually worked, and that magical seal would eventually become known as the Bloodstone. But there's a little bit more to this story. Around about the same time as this happened, the Mursaat, one of these 5 races, was said to have betrayed the other races and fled from Tyria. It's presumed that each of these races had their own areas of expertise. The Gw2, for example, were stargazers. And the Mursaat had eventually learned how to slip out of phase with Tyria. To the layman, or to anyone, a year ago or so, this basically would have meant they could have slipped into the mist. They could have traveled to other realms at their will, becoming invisible to anyone on Tyria, and by doing this, they could in theory hide from the Elder Dragons, not on Tyria, but somewhere else in the mist while they were awake, and then return later. And so this is what they did. Instead of choosing to fight and allying with the other races, the Mursaat hid and betrayed the other races. Now, there's a very popular theory that the wiki even seems to state as fact, and you've got to be careful with the wiki sometimes. I believe this is not fact. It's a theory that I believe in too. But the idea of, at one point, the Mursaat betray the other races, and at another point, the Seers create the Bloodstone. We don't actually know which one happened first. A very popular theory, which is based on some dialogue from Mursaat, which I'll read you in a second, says that when the Seers wanted to create the Bloodstone, they asked all of the other races to pour their magic into it. And the great betrayal that the Mursaat pulled on the other races was they refused to give their power to the Bloodstones. They refused, and they used it instead to run and hide. Now, that is not canon. That is not for sure. Here's the only dialogue we have on the topic, okay? It comes from a Ra explorable path in Guild Wars 2 when you are doing the Mursaat path. The NPC with you is an Asura, and she's been researching the Mursaat, and at the end of the path, she says this. She says that the ancient races had gathered together to fight the dragons, each contributing something. Yet the Mursaat took their knowledge and fled into a half-world out of phase with our own. They would have left the rest of the world die just to save themselves. That's all we've got. So it's not confirmed that this was the great betrayal the Mursaat said, but this is a theory that I believe in. So we have a magical seal, and what this means is that within this seal is a bunch of magic from many of the races. Perhaps putting their magic into it came at a great cost to them. This may explain why the Gw2 were once a very powerful race. They contributed so much of their magic, so much of their strength into the Bloodstone. Maybe then they began to fall from grace until what we see them as now. But according to this theory, it would mean the Mursaat never dedicated any of their magic, and they stayed just as powerful as they always were. Anyway, so after this happens, the Mursaat flee, the Bloodstone has been created, the Elder Dragons eventually, under some circumstance, fall asleep again. Their destructive ways obviously stopped. They did fall asleep. Maybe they were finally sated. They could find no more magic. But whatever had happened, they never managed to get to the magic in the Bloodstone. And these powerful races that were, thriving when they first woke up, seem to have been set back in a big way. We hear a little later that the Mursaat did return to Tyria, and when they returned to Tyria, they went to war with the Seers.
For centuries, my kind has fought the Mursaat. I know the rituals that can give you at least some protection from their agonizing touch.
Why did they go to war with the Seers and not the other 4 races? Well, perhaps the Seers were the only race that was still in a position magically to contend with the Mursaat. One theory might be that because these Seers were the architects themselves of the Bloodstone, it never drained them that much to hide their magic within it, and their race was still somewhat capable of fighting the Mursaat. But when the Mursaat came back, they were just as powerful as they'd ever been, and they ended up winning a war with the Seers, basically dooming that race to almost extinction. All the way through the Guild Wars franchise, we've met maybe 2 or 3 Seers ever. Like, they're pretty much gone and extinct, and this is because of the Mursaat. Remember that the Critons in the first game saw the Mursaat, these creatures with the ability to become invisible or slip phase or whatever, they saw them as gods. The Mursaat had these powerful spells, Spectral Agony. Agony we know from Fractals of the Mists as being something at least to do with mist travel, right? So the Mursaat came back and were godlike, and they were able to overwhelm the other races, and this sort of set them up as this evil race that had betrayed Tyria back when the old Elder Dragons were awake, returned once they were asleep again, and abused their powerful position to wrestle control of Tyria. I will note that when Prophecies first came out in 2005, the original story of the Mursaat was somewhat more grey than that. Yes, they were villains of the story, but if you looked closely at the story, they were also victims. The Mursaat were only doing what they did in the first game, you know, pretending to be gods to the Crichtons, because they had been told a prophecy that would mean the extinction of their race, and they were doing everything they could to stop themselves becoming extinct. I've always liked the idea of the Mursaat as not necessarily being evil, but a nuanced race, you know, a shade of grey. And if you really think about this story now, if this is the truth of what happened with the Mursaat, they're still not technically fully evil. Yes, they did something bad by abandoning the other races and fleeing, but surely that's their worst crime. You know, fear, choosing to flee and not fight. The idea that they return later to dominate the world sure does sound bad, but then we also have very little evidence that after their war with the Seers, they did do much to oppress other burgeoning races on the planet. So, who knows? Anyway, so the Elder Dragons fell asleep, the Mursaat returned, most of the races fell to nothingness, probably the Forgotten were the most prosperous of those races at this point, and many years passed. Finally, the human gods come to Tyria. And the Tyria they come to is a Tyria that has fallen into destruction, as it would seem, you know, left in the wake of a previous Elder Dragon rising, and they take it upon themselves to terraform, if you will. I don't think the term is 100% applicable, but bring life there, you know. Many people attribute Melanju to bringing plants and greenness back to Tyria, and they are credited with bringing many races to the planet too, including perhaps the humans. Now, one thing that was unclear for a long time is, did the gods know about the Elder Dragons when they came to Tyria? This is deliberately shrouded in mystery still to an extent, but they certainly knew much of the old world. The whole idea of Ara explorable mode is that beneath Ara, the gods had constructed these great vaults, and inside these vaults, they were hiding artifacts left over from the previous Elder Dragons rising. When they came to Tyria, they scoured the whole world and found as much evidence as they could, as many powerful artifacts as they could, and hid them in the vaults beneath Ara. It's obvious that the gods met the Forgotten at some point, and the Forgotten certainly knew about Glint, who was a champion of a now sleeping Elder Dragon, so it's very likely the gods knew, at least to some extent, about the Elder Dragons, and they were trying to shield the world from this danger. One thing in particular that they did find was this big magical seal created by the Seers, we would eventually become known as the Bloodstone, and they took this and they hid it beneath the vaults in Ara. Many years passed, and in what the humans considered to be year 0, so, you know, 1,200 or so years from present day in Guild Wars 2, during year 0, one of the human gods, Abaddon, decided he would release this magic to the races of the world and let them have it. So he managed to open up this Bloodstone seal, and the magic flowed out to everyone on Tyria. Now, there's quite a few things to consider here right now. Does this mean the only magic on Tyria was magic from these Bloodstones? I would argue no. I would argue that since the Elder Dragons fell asleep again, just like they did before, they were leaking magic again. So there was probably some magical influence in the world before Abaddon gave the magic to the races of Tyria. Certainly the Mursaat had a lot of magic at their disposal at this point. But when Abaddon did this, it flooded the many races you could maybe even consider primitive at this point. You know, early humans, the early Char, perhaps many more, and this actually caused chaos across Tyria. The races didn't know how to handle this stuff, and they went to war. Another thing to consider about this part of the story is that Abaddon released this magic from the Bloodstone. And this was something Elder Dragons couldn't do. This Bloodstone was a last-ditch attempt to keep magic away from the Elder Dragons. It was sealed away in this stone that not even the Elder Dragons could break through its magical protections, but then somehow Abaddon, one of the human gods, comes and he's totally fine able to do this. It's an interesting idea because in the personal story they set up an awful lot that, oh, you know, the Elder Dragons eat gods, the gods are nothing compared to Zaitan, blah blah blah, you know, making the gods feel small. But here we have a capability of a god that an Elder Dragon never had. The gods were able to release magic, while the Elder Dragons seem to only be able to consume magic. Maybe there's more significance in that than we currently know. Anyway, so these wars break out, and the king of Man at the time, a man named King Doric, he makes a pilgrimage to Ara, and he begs the gods, please, you have to take this magic back, we cannot control this. And the gods are moved, and they listen to his plight. And so they seal the magic back within the Bloodstones. This is presumably all happens in the vaults beneath Ara. They seal it with his blood. Now, it's said that because they sealed it with his blood, all descendants of King Doric, of his lineage, of the royal line, may have some say over the bloodstones. If that magic to potentially be released once again, perhaps it's somehow tied to that bloodline. Anyone in royalty, in human royalty in Tyria right now, is descended from King Doric. So that blood flows in the humans' current queen, Queen Jennah. So the gods resealed this, the bloodstone, but then they did something extra. In Irara Explorable, it stated that they infused it with more power. Power that they were drawing from the general area, power which presumably was some of Zaitan's magic here. They made it more powerful, they specifically went out of their way to explain this in Guild Wars 2 to us, and then the gods broke it. They split it into 5 pieces. Now, a lot of the lore we're currently looking at, it suggests the idea that there's 6 different orbs, maybe 7 if you include one for Tyria, but here we have the number 5. 5 pieces of the bloodstone were created, and each was supposedly representing its own thing. Human perception of the bloodstone was this, that there was one shard of the bloodstone called the keystone, and the keystone would be what you'd need to use if you ever wanted to rebuild the bloodstone. The idea of rebuilding the bloodstone was something they established in prophecies, but was never something that's ever happened in the plot. It was just said to be possible, and we've never actually had story go along those lines. I believe we now may finally be going into that story, but I'll talk about that in a second. The other 4 shards, the humans said, each represented a different school of magic: preservation, aggression, denial, and destruction. And now that the bloodstone was separated, yes, people could still tap into magic, but you could only tap into the magic of one of these bloodstones at once. And so this was the Guild Wars 1 weird lore way of saying, here, this is why you can't be of all professions at once. With this done, Abaddon, who had originally given the magic to everyone, for reasons we don't fully understand right now, was he trying to help the Elder Dragons by releasing this magic? Who knows? But now that it had been sealed away again, he got very angry. He got so angry, in fact, that he went to war. He took his Marganites, a group of seafaring people, he was the god of water at the time, and with his army he tried to fight the other gods over this decision. It took the might of all 5 of the other gods, and they cast him into the realm of torment as a prison where they thought he could hopefully never escape. They could not destroy Abaddon. They needed someone to usurp him, someone who would eventually become Cormyr back in Guild Wars 1. So there, he was just imprisoned. And by doing this, 1 year after they'd originally given magic to the world, after they brought war to Tyria, they decided that they had to leave. They threw these 5 chunks of the bloodstone into the caldera of the largest volcano near Irara, which was on the Fire Island chain. And with that, hoping that, the magic was sealed away now and nice and safe, sealed by the blood of the royals, also hidden in this volcano, the Exodus happened, and the gods left. They stepped back. Well, that wasn't the end of the story. Shortly after, this volcano erupted, and we also found that from within his prison, Abaddon was slowly growing stronger. Eventually, he tried to overtake Tyria from his prison in an event named Nightfall, which was what the 3rd campaign of the first game was. But an interesting point to note is that one of the areas where the Realm of Torment was closest to Tyria happened to be exactly where the Bloodstone was thrown by the gods. So I like to think that from his prison, Abaddon was desperately still trying to get at this Bloodstone. He was trying to get to the keystone to release the magic once again. This is why that connection happened there at a place called the Door of Kamali. So the volcano erupted, perhaps on accident, perhaps because of Abaddon from his other realm pushing through, and these shards of the Bloodstone were scattered throughout Tyria. The keystone remained in the caldera of the volcano just outside of Abaddon's grasp, and the other bloodstones were sent flying around Tyria. We found the locations of the keystone in the first game, and we also found the locations of 2 of the other shards of the bloodstone. We don't know which school of magic supposedly they were, but one was in a cave near the Shiver Peaks. A cave which you can visit in Guild Wars 2. It's hidden, but you can find the entrance, and it's been sealed up. And another was in the Maguma jungle, which, surprise, surprise, the Living Stories just put us in. So let's slow down just for a second. I want to talk a bit about this idea of preservation, aggression, denial, and destruction. These are 4 schools of magic. The humans' idea of what 4 schools of magic were based on this story of the Bloodstones. Now you could take that as literal and you could say absolutely this is exactly what it is, which I think a lot of people in the community do. But what you've got to consider is there have been interviews since the launch of the game which state not many humans even believe in this model anymore. The Guild Wars 2 of today is actually in an environment where not only is there magic from the bloodstones, but magic has still been seeping out of the elder dragons too, and so the world knows a lot of magic. And this idea that things have been sealed away so tightly doesn't necessarily hold true. Not many of any other race believes that this is an exact interpretation of the schools of magic and the way things have been sealed up. And in an interview, the devs have even stated that you'd be hard-pressed to find a human who would believe the same thing. Perhaps very old, wizened humans and, you know, old powerful liches or mages would still believe in those tenets. So what I believe the devs are doing here is they're looking back at their Guild Wars 1 story, and they're looking at this idea of the 4 schools, and they're saying, we really don't like what we did here. We really don't like that we have 6 Elder Dragons, or 6 gods, or maybe 6 different pools of magic, and we've split it into only 4, and what they're doing is softly trying to retcon it. That's what I believe that they're doing, and you do need to take this interpretation of these schools of magic a little bit less strictly. There's also this idea of the keystone, and the idea that we may actually rebuild the bloodstone at some point. Now, there was also a lore interview with Jeff Grubb, I believe this was even before the launch of the game, where he was asked about the keystone, asked about the bloodstone, and he was specifically responded by saying that this was a story that Guild Wars 2 would go into, not at the initial release, but possibly will have an impact on future expansions. Now, this doesn't mean, obviously, oh my god, they're confirming an expansion here. This was before they even knew that they were going to do like a living world style thing, so he's using the word expansion here. But this is the story we're now in, you know, expanded story on Tyria and, you know, further storylines. That's where we are now. And it certainly seems like, given his comment back there, that eventually the bloodstones would come back into the story, and the fact that we're now in the Maguma jungle, we may be about to see the keystone finally be used. What is in the best interest of the Elder Dragons right now? When they wake up again and they want to consume this magic, they know that all that magic is still stored away in these separated fragments of the Bloodstone. Well, perhaps that's going to be a bit of the story here. Maybe it's not a coincidence either that in the most recent patch, the devs set up the story that there is a locket out there that shows the true heir to the Crichton throne, and there have been multiple hints that maybe our queen could soon die. I'll let you guys make your own speculation, but it seems to be leading somewhere. If our queen gets knocked out, if, say, the next heir gets captured, someone with the blood that sealed the bloodstone falls into the wrong hands, this could mean a lot more for Tyria than just human society and losing their queen. Erin said in a recent update, cut off the head and the rest will follow. Everyone seems to think that's to do with the pale tree right now, but what if it's not? What if it's to do with Queen Jennah? She dies, he gets the blood, feeds the Elder Dragons, undoes the good that the Seers once did, and the rest of the races will follow. There are some other things that this story behind the Bloodstones reveals too. People constantly ask, you know, if there's only 6 Elder Dragons, why are they all hanging around Tyria? Why are they always around Tyria? Well, maybe because this is where the shards of the Bloodstone are, and the Elder Dragons are most drawn to those than anywhere else, because there's such a vast amount of power stored away there. A power they couldn't get their hands on their previous rising, but things will be different this time. Let's go back to the image I started this video showing you guys with. This image looks an awful lot like what we saw with the Eternal Alchemy. I believe it's a representation of pretty much the same thing. When the Seers created the Bloodstone and these races started pouring their magic into it, where had these races originally got that magic from? They didn't get it from the gods, they didn't get it from the Bloodstones, they got it from the Elder Dragons as they slept. 6 Elder Dragons sleeping out of reach. Slowly they absorbed their magic, and so when it was all sealed away, it would only make sense that the ritual or the inscription on it somewhat represented the Seers' interpretation of what we're now calling the Eternal Alchemy. In Guild Wars 1, this big inscription you can see on the Bloodstone was also found on the entrances of many big sealed off inscriptions and doorways deep beneath Tyria, in the depths of Tyria. And where do we know many of the Elder Dragons were sleeping? Beneath Tyria. Or in general, just think about the ley lines themselves and the pool of magic within they sit. That's all underground too. Probably more activity of the Seers and perhaps some of these other races trying to identify where much of the magic was coming from and where they could seal it away. Lastly, I'll end the video on one other note. I've already set up why I think the story is going to be going into stuff to do with the Bloodstones, perhaps even to do with an attempt on Queen Jennah's life. Think about this. What just happened with Canach? He was bought by the Shining Blade, protectors specifically of the Queen against assassination attempts. Maybe it's no coincidence that he also happens to be Sylvari and potentially corruptible by Mordremoth. But I also talked a fair bit in this video about the Mursaat. That's because I believe the Mursaat may finally also have a presence in the future patches. These bloodstones, as we knew them in Guild Wars 1, were being used by the Mursaat to try and save their own skins. So when we find them in Guild Wars 2, perhaps the Mursaat still have some kind of interest. But more interestingly, if you look at the inscription on the stone, in the very center where we, as a witness of the Eternal Alchemy, saw the pale tree, instead the seers seem to have marked on their bloodstone a triangle. Now this triangle is actually a reference to something we saw the Mursaat using in the first game. There was something called the Eye of Jannah. It was a powerful magical artifact. It was a floating eye that was trapped in a pyramid. And what this Eye of Jannah did was it tested people for their magical strength. It searched for magic. How did the Mursaat have something like the Eye of Jannah? Why did they have it? Well, I believe the Eye of Jannah was something used during the last Elder Dragon's Rising to locate magic to perhaps then be sealed away in the Bloodstones later. Maybe their betrayal was that the Mursaat were the best race for finding magic that the Seers wanted to seal away, but instead they chose to hoard it and leave it vulnerable for the Elder Dragons to corrupt. But it gets better. A final thought. Back during Guild Wars 1, where we saw the Eye of Jannah, the Mursaat weren't using it to seal magic into the Bloodstones, but to do something slightly different. They used the eye to find Critons filled with magic they called the Chosen, brought them to the Bloodstone, and killed them on it. Instead of that magic being sucked into the Bloodstone, however, they were sucked into soul batteries, which in turn were used to keep the door of Kamali shut and Abaddon from getting his hands on the Bloodstone and releasing magic again. That's right, the Mursaat was stopping Abaddon from coming back to Tyria, just as the gods would in theory have wanted. May I remind you guys that last year we had a choice between two stories in the Fractals. One, the Thormanova Reactor, or two, the story of Abaddon. Well, at first that never particularly seemed related to this story, until maybe now. Why did the Mursaat want to do this? Why did they want to keep Abaddon out? Well, yes, Abaddon's titans threatened to wipe out their whole race, but also, think about how the Mursaat may have come to power and won their war over the Seers in the first place. They won because so much of the magic and strength of their enemies had been sealed away. Wouldn't it be potentially devastating for the Mursaat to let that stuff be released again? And what does that mean now if an Elder Dragon wants to do what Abaddon seemed to aim for? What if an Elder Dragon wants to release the magic from these Bloodstones? Does that make the Mursaat our enemies now? Or our friends? Is this all a coincidence? All of these themes of searching for magic? I think not. I think there's good cause for some of these things to be coming into the story in a big way, and I guess in just a few patches time, we'll find out. Thanks very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.